I'm the new Jim Duffy. Some of you already know Tatenda and Jerry Johnson and have heard about their nonprofit organization, Finding Hope Africa. They have presented at ADG before, a couple times. Recently, Tatenda started working on a book she's wanted to write for some time. She solicited the help of her friend Pam Kuch, and the two ladies have spent hundreds of hours bringing Tatenda's story to life. Today, Pam has come to share excerpts from Tatenda's almost finished book. Note, please save your questions until the end. There's a lot to cover.
Good job, Jim.
Went to Africa in 2019 and met with our friends Tatenda and Jerry, who took us into the streets of Harare, Zimbabwe's capital, in the wee hours of a dark night, early morning. And we saw firsthand the hundreds and hundreds of children destitute, living in the street. We have homeless here, that's true. But they're mixed with families or adults, mostly adults. Some children you'll see. There it's children, toddlers, teens, living on their own, doing the best they can to survive. We watched in awe as Tatenda walked down the streets among those children with her confidence and compassion. And we saw, you want me louder? Yeah. Okay.
Pardon? You could use the mic if you'd like. We have a mic.
Do I need to?
Yeah.
I can hear just fine.
I don't have it. You have the microphone. It's not up there. Oh, it's inside. Wow, I've never been told to talk louder in my whole life. How's that? Now.
No.
I'm just gonna keep talking, he said. Okay, well, during our visit, we found out that Tatenda had been wanting to write a book. And at some point, she asked me if I would help her. Consequently, we have spent hundreds and hundreds of hours working together to get Finding Hope to the point where it's about to be published. It's been a labor of love and my honor and privilege to put her amazing story into words on a page. I believe it is a powerful story, and I'm glad that you've come today to learn a little more about Tatenda and some of the backstory of Finding Hope Africa. Tatenda Chota was born and raised in Harare, Zimbabwe, Africa. She and her family are of the Shona ethnic group, or tribe, native to Southern Africa. Shona people place great emphasis on being communal and inclusive. They share a sense of responsibility for others. Concern for the well-being of all is central to their value system, and the well-being of the whole community comes before one's own. Tatenda was raised Christian. She and her family faithfully attended church and Sunday school every Sunday. She attended excellent schools and qualified to go to the University of Zimbabwe and received her honors degree in politics there. She accomplished this in just 3 years' time. A few years later, she graduated from the University of KwaZulu-Natal with a master's degree in population studies. At the top of her class, she was awarded membership in the Golden Key International Honor Society. Once graduated and ready to take on the world, Tatenda found the task of getting hired a little more difficult than she'd expected. So she decided to dedicate each day to interviewing and networking. Every other moment was spent reaching out to the less fortunate in her community. Though she did not have much, she was happy to share what she had with those in need. Values of selflessness and giving were instilled in her and her siblings by her grandmother and mother, whose every waking moments were blessed by giving of their time, love, support, talents, and materialistic items to anyone needing them. The children followed these examples, showing kindness indiscriminately, even to complete strangers. Titenda worked tirelessly day and night, often only getting a couple of hours of sleep at most. But no matter how much she gave of herself or did for others, she could only see how much more needed to be done. She attended her own church and enjoyed going to church and prayer meetings with her friends. However, something most unusual started happening every time she would go to a church service, a Bible study, or a prayer group. At some point, Titenda would be personally called up front, and the presiding pastor would tell her that he had a message for her. Stated in various words, the message is all focused on how God wanted Titenda to know that she was going to be called on to help children in Zimbabwe, as well as other parts of the world. One pastor announced that Titenda would be known as the mother who would help vulnerable children in the streets of Zimbabwe, and even known throughout the world for advocating and standing up for marginalized individuals. She wondered, how could these people she'd never seen, never met before, how could they be telling her such things? Such experiences happened time and again, and Titenda began to question whether it was really God sending her these messages. Could she really help so many children? Children who needed so very much. Why wasn't God telling her these things himself? She became overcome with uncertainty. And though uncertain about the people and the messages she was getting, she was certain her work must focus on studying and helping vulnerable people. It was a most joyous day when a very lucky company announced that they had a need for someone with exactly her credentials. God had answered her prayers, and she would work directly with communities in jeopardy and vulnerable individuals. One day, while walking down the street, Titenda heard someone calling out her name. As she stopped and looked around, she discovered it was a friend of hers, a pastor, calling her. She had not seen him in quite a long while, as he lived a long distance away, and she wondered what had brought him into the city. After briefly greeting one another, Titenda was surprised to hear him ask, "Why haven't you started?" Not understanding, Titenda responded, "Started what?" He answered, "You know what God wants you to do," and he walked away. It wasn't but a few days later when yet another person asked her this very same question. Disturbing and perplexing, both the messages of how she was going to help children in need and the questions about why she wasn't starting kept coming at her. And it wasn't long before she started having fitful dreams. Now at this time she lived in Glenora. It's a subdivision of Harare. She had to rely on public transportation to get to and from work daily. Well, public transportation is not real reliable in Zimbabwe. And Titenda had to tack on extra hours to her day just to make sure she got to work on time. Living on the outskirts of Harare also meant she and her neighbors fell victim to the whims of Zimbabwe's government. In Zimbabwe, the government directly controls many aspects of life. One's power can be turned off for undetermined amounts of time. It's not uncommon for a blackout to last 18 hours or more. No one knows when it's back on. Gasoline prices can be changed at the snap of an official's fingers, and it's not unusual to pay $12.60 a gallon. We're yet after waiting, sometimes as long as 20. You get to the pump to find there's no gas left. Well, after working in the city for a while, Tatenda observed that power and water were a bit more reliable there. So she decided to move to an apartment closer to the city center. An added benefit of living closer to work was that she could walk instead of depending on unreliable buses. She spent a lot of time walking in the streets of Harare now, and everywhere she went, she saw things that she'd never noticed before. There were shoeless children eating from trash cans, sniffing glue, and begging and stealing. Child prostitutes on every block. And even though less easy to detect, she saw evidence of children being bought and sold. Tatenda was shocked to realize that many of these children begging at street corners, even as young as 4 and 5 years old, with their little baby siblings strapped to their back, were begging to take whatever they were given back to their mothers who sat nearby in the shadows. There were toddlers wandering on their own, wearing nothing but soiled diapers, with their little hands held out to anyone passing by. She began to see that homelessness was the norm for hundreds and hundreds of young children. Returning to her comfortable apartment each evening, she could only think about all of those vulnerable children on the street, and she was overwhelmed with compassion and a need to help. At work, she was assigned a special project with the homeless in Harare, and it gave her more insight into the challenges they experienced. She listened to their stories. Men, women, and children struggling to survive. Battered and abused women and children hiding in shadows, eating garbage, drinking urine from the gutters, and sleeping on the ground to escape the wrath of their abusers. Alcoholics, drug addicts, and prostitutes all begging for money and food. None knowing where they would find the next scraps to ease their hunger. All steering clear of certain individuals or gangs, lest they be beaten, robbed, raped, or killed. Most in such a sad existence through no fault of their own. For you see, in this society, there's over 90% unemployment, where once hardworking mothers and fathers fell victim to cutbacks and layoffs, while prices soared through the roof due to inflation, high inflation, which rose 16 sextillion% at one point. Not all of these people were bad, nor do they all have ill intentions. Most were simply doing their best to get through the day because, sure enough, there was going to be another one to get through tomorrow. Tatenda had always had a close relationship with God, but now she never left his side. She and he talked daily. Tatenda prayed all the time and thanked God for things that she had and prayed for things others needed. Never before had she and God been so close as they were now. She knew she could trust him with everything, and she knew he always answered her prayers. Even though her work required long hours of her time and tested her heart and soul as she dealt with gut-wrenching situations on a daily basis, all Tatenda could think about was how much more needed to be done. She started thinking that she needed to get out of the office and into the trenches if change was to happen. I'd like to present Tatenda Chodock Johnson. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much to all of you for coming today to this special event.
I say it's special because when I see all of you, you made it special. Your presence here has made it so special. It's an honor to be here with you and share a dream. It's a dream come true, and I feel so honored. First of all, I want to thank Pam and Bruce for making my dream a reality. Thank you so much for helping me. In September of 2019, 3 couples from the Manhattan Beach Community Church came to visit us in Zimbabwe. My father and mother-in-law, Pat and Ian Johnson, Bruce and Pam Kuch, and Laura New and Jim Basela. They came to Zimbabwe to visit us. On one of the days, while chatting with Bruce and Pam, I shared with them my dream of writing a book one day about my life story. To my surprise, they were so excited, and they told me that they would love to help me achieve this dream. At the end of March 2020, when COVID-19 started, Jerry and I returned to the US from Zimbabwe. A few months later, I received a call from Pam asking me, what are your thoughts about us starting the book? And I thought it was a good idea. And we brainstormed on some ideas and I began writing the book. Over the past 6 months, Pam spent hours, many hours, editing my book, often late in the night and early in the mornings. I would like to take a moment to personally thank Pam. I am so grateful for all your hard work, your commitment, your tireless hours for helping me realize my dream. Thank you so much. What inspired me to write a book of my life story was the realization that many people never have the opportunity to discover and live out their God-given purpose. It has been my desire to inspire someone through my life story to discover their reason for living. One of my favorite quotes is by a man called Les Brown. He said, and I quote, "The graveyard is the richest place on earth because it is here that you will find all the hopes and dreams that were never fulfilled, the books that were never written, the songs that were never sang, the inventions that were never shared, the cures that were never discovered, all because someone was too afraid to take that first step and carry out their dream." I'm going to read a small paragraph from my book that illustrates something similar. I began to realize that part of my purpose in life was to help people in need. And I also learned that God reveals His purpose for our lives at different times and in different ways. He was letting me know that my dreams, my interests, my beliefs, my passions, and life experiences were part of a bigger plan, His plan. My interactions with other people. I'll mention even meeting my husband, Jerry. We met in Harare one night in the streets whilst I was feeding the children. That was my first experience of meeting him. And when I look back, we never thought we would fall in love, work together, help the children, and now we're expecting our baby. My interaction with other people, like the pastors who sometimes told me things that made no sense at the time, people who came into my life in ways I did not understand. And my interaction, my relations to them were all being used by God. Even subject I had chosen to study and the career path I was on, all of these things were pieces of the puzzle who wanted me to put together. He was helping me realize that even a simple thing like a desire to move or a traumatic experience like the death of my mother were part of the bigger picture. It was a picture that he was helping me put together. Then when I was ready, he helped me realize that he had already defined as the purpose of my life. My book shares different pieces of my life that helped me discover my purpose. It also shares how I continue to live out my purpose to this day. I would like to take this moment to share with you all one of the pieces of my puzzle. My father and mother raised me and my 4 siblings with values of hard work, honesty, and kindness. My father, being a wealthy man, practiced polygamy, which was during that time normal, especially to men who had wealth. And so he had multiple wives and children from each of his spouses. Tragically, I lost my mother, my role model, my hero, at the age of 16. Life completely changed. Our father would visit and support us whenever he could. But he was busy trying to support his other wives and children who were living as a child-headed family. And suddenly I found myself as an orphan and taking care of my 14-year-old brother and 9-year-old sister. What kept me going then and even to this day was if ever I am to see my mother again, I want to give a good account of my life because she believed in me. I remember praying to God and hoping someone would help me in life. Life was difficult, but all of this was preparing me for my purpose. When I look back, God allowed it to happen because He called me to help vulnerable children and orphaned children. I had to experience it so that when I see these children with nothing, it takes me back to the time in my life when I had nothing and wished someone would help me. This experience has taught me to be sensitive and compassionate towards others, understanding what it means not to have. This is my life story, a journey of a single seed that fell to the ground and died, producing a plentiful harvest of new lives. Thank you.
Promised, I'm reading excerpts from the book. And so now I share Darlington's story. In 2013, my sister Primrose invited me to her church for a 5-day conference that took place in the evenings. The first night of the conference, I sat next to a young man, and I took note of him. The second night, I noticed him again, and the third night, though he sat with some other people, there he was again, right near me. I said to myself, I need to talk to this boy. Why are we drawn to sit close to each other? Is it a coincidence? Or something else going on here? I had learned from a pastor I knew that sometimes one's calling or purpose in life attracts others in need of something that you have to offer. And sometimes the people you meet in your life are part of a greater plan, your destiny. These thoughts consumed me as I sat looking at that young man, and I wondered if maybe God wanted me to get up and go meet him. I was sure it wasn't a coincidence, so I approached him and boldly started. Excuse me, I don't mean to bother you, but are you an orphan? He responded saying, yes, I am an orphan, and my name is Darlington. Darlington was receptive to talking to me, so when I sat down, he joined me, and the time passed quickly. We talked about many things, and in the course of our conversation, I told him, I think God wants us to be friends. Is that okay with you? He told me he was okay with that, and he began sharing some more personal things about himself. Then all of a sudden, it was as if a dam had broken, and the words just came pouring out as he shared his life story. Darlington's story began with, I was born with HIV/AIDS. My parents left me in the care of other family when they both died from HIV/AIDS. And from the beginning of my life, I faced rejection and discrimination, especially from my relatives, because they were afraid they would catch it from me. I remember I got really, really sick one time, and no one cared for me. I was left alone, and I wondered if anyone would even notice if I died. It was clear I was not welcome. So the moment I was well enough and had gained back some strength, I decided to move to the streets. Darlington paused for a moment, collected his thoughts, and then continued. In the streets, I met other kids who taught me skills that I was going to need to survive. Skills like stealing, begging, taking drugs. They helped numb the pain of hunger and cold. I made friends on the street, and one of my friends and I decided we were going to leave Zimbabwe together. We illegally crossed the border into South Africa, hoping for something better. However, once we were there, we had to beg and sleep in the streets again. One night I was sleeping in the gutter, and a group of Nigerian men stopped their vehicle. One of them got out of his car to relieve himself. It was dark, and the man did not see me sleeping there in front of him. He peed right on me. This woke me up, and I scampered to escape. But when I moved, the man saw me. He said he wanted to make amends. He was calling after me. He would take care of me. I stopped, and he and his friends picked me up, literally, and put me in the back of their truck. They saw I was a vulnerable young boy alone living in the streets, and they took me to their house. They gave me food to eat. I marveled at my good fortune. And then a few days later, they offered me a job. I was so grateful, as I thought surely this was the beginning of a better life. For my job, I was going to have to drive, so they taught me how. And then they taught me yet another skill. They handed me a rifle. and taught me how to use it. You see, I found out these men were armed robbers, and my job was helping them in their life of crime. Armed robbery wasn't their only livelihood either. They took me into schools, and I had to sell drugs. They gave me a uniform, and wearing it, I was supposed to blend in with the other students. And then when no one was looking, I offered drugs to the other kids. I not only sold drugs, pills, and some other powerful stuff, but some of it required injecting. I taught the kids how to do this, but some of them couldn't, and I had to do it for them. One day we robbed a bank. I was the driver, and as I waited on the street for my friends to come out, something must have gone wrong, because the next thing I knew, I was racing down the street and we were being followed by armed police officers and vehicles and helicopters flying overhead. I was scared to death, but I kept on driving. I had no choice. I knew I might be shot by the police, but if I didn't keep going, it was certain I would be shot by one of my bank robber buddies, who are now yelling obscenities at me, trying to get me to go faster. I was driving like a maniac. And yet, as fast as I was going, one of the police cars pulled up beside me. And the next thing I knew, there was this explosion, a really loud noise. I realized I'd been shot. In a panic, I looked down to find out where, and I lost control, and we hit a tree. Wasting no time, my Nigerian criminal friends ran off, leaving me in the car to die. I don't remember everything that followed, but I do know the police discovered that the money was gone too. They were extremely angry because I was the only one left. They took it out on me. One of the policemen jerked me out of the vehicle and handcuffed me. Then he shoved me in the back of his car and took me to the hospital. I was relieved that we went there, but we were there just long enough to have my wound looked after when the police showed up again. This time they took me to prison. After a couple of days, one of the guards told me that I had a visitor. The Nigerians had paid a lawyer to come into the prison to see me. I was sure he was just another thug pretending to be a lawyer. The police let him in, and he gave me a fake Zimbabwean ID. He told me that my friends, the Nigerians, knew I was going to have to go to court, and they were afraid I would expose them, so they paid him to tell me what to say. As soon as my lawyer left, I told the magistrate everything, and he released me after he had heard my story. I was taken to the border and left on the Zimbabwean side. I made it into Botswana, and trying my hand at stealing again, I got by for a little while, but I was not a very accomplished thief. And before long, the police caught me, and I found myself back in prison. Now, this prison was just as bad as the last one, but I was there for a very long 3 months. Then one day, a pastor came to preach the word of God. I listened to what he had to say, and I decided to give my life over to him. I started shaping up and doing the best I could to prove that I had changed my life. And 1 year later, when I was released, I returned to Zimbabwe. Sitting there listening to Darlington's story, I wondered how he came to be with me that night in the church. Darlington shared how he now is attending school and living in a room not far away from this church. He said he was getting help from a nun that he met one night when she came out on the street to help the children there. After hearing his whole story, I told Darlington that if he ever came to the city, I would be very happy to help him in any way I could. I gave him my contact information, and we stayed in touch. I saw him from time to time, and I helped him with money and food when I had enough to share. It was June of 2014 when I saw Darlington again in the city. We talked about his health and school, and as he spoke, I remembered that he had once told me that he had felt driven to help other children in the streets, and I wanted to help him. And I wanted to share the ideas of what I was wanting to do. This young man had knowledge and experience living most of his life on the streets, and he possessed a treasure that could help me and therefore many others. So I opened up and told him everything. Then I asked what he thought about all of that and if he wanted to work with me. Oh, he was so excited and he was happy for this opportunity. He couldn't wait to start. So the first time we went to the streets together was a Friday night around 8 o'clock, and he took me to the corner of Leopold, Tapawera, and Union Avenue, where we saw a group of boys, about 15 of them, between the ages of 10 and 18 years old, and they were playing football in the street. Their football was made out of newspapers and plastic that had been crushed and pressed into a kind of a ball. Darlington called over to them, as he knew most of the boys, and they came running over to us. I was introduced, and we shared one of the ideas that we had had. We asked them what they thought about us bringing a hot meal to them each night. We asked them if they would like for us to come and for us to eat together and to get to know one another. It was the general consensus that they would be very happy to have us bring dinner, and they would like it if we stayed with them and talked and ate. So we agreed on a meeting place. I told the group that we would start the very next Monday, and their faces lit up. They were so grateful that we were doing such a thing for them, and they told us it was going to be wonderful to have a hot meal. Well, Monday came, and Darlington and I were supposed to bring the boys their meal, but I had no money to buy the food. The words, "Why are you not starting?" filled my head. And I said, God, you told me to do this. And so I have started. I trusted you would provide or show me how to if I just took the first step. So I took that step, a step of faith. I told those children that I was going to bring them a hot meal on Monday. God, it's now Monday, and I cannot make good on my promise. Have you not heard my prayers? I've prayed constantly since I told the boys Darlington and I would be there for them. And I prayed again this morning, reminding you that today's the day. I had to provide food for the children, but I don't have money to buy the food. I do have faith that you're going to make a way. I have my troubles in God's hands. The moment I arrived at work, the company accountant called me into his office. He wanted to give me my transportation money. He usually gave me this money to cover bus fare for the week. But that day he said, today I've decided to give you the entire month's allowance. In my heart, I knew what this was all about. And I said, God, thank you. Thank you so much for this money. I will use it to buy food for the children. Thank you for providing for tonight's meal. I knew I was going to be walking to work that month, but I didn't care. God had heard my plea and he came through for the sake of the children. Now, instead of heading home at the end of that work day, I immediately went to buy groceries. I hurried home and prepared rice and chicken. I wanted each of the children in our circle to feel special, to know that they are special, regardless of how some judged and looked down on them. I had seen other people who thought they were being generous and helpful by giving away their things, but usually the things were worn out and in bad condition. When they donated food, it was generally something they themselves would never have eaten. Well, that is not what I intended. I wanted to give these children nourishing food that I would sit down and be happy to eat with them. And that is what I did. Each night when I delivered a hot meal, I would sit in the street with the boys and share it with them. I remember the first meal I delivered, I brought pots and pans and plates and cups and spoons and containers of water for drinking, other containers of water for washing our hands, and soap for washing their hands. I didn't have a car, so that meant I had to take the public bus. as I climbed on the bus with all of those things in arm and hanging from me. I must have been quite a sight. I must have been quite a sight carrying all those items, and the smell of the food filled the bus. People in the bus must have really wondered what was going on. When I arrived, there was Darlington. He was there with the other boys, all waiting for me. They gathered around me, and in their excitement, they all were talking at once. I just led them, and I prepared a bowl for washing our hands. Then, when everyone had washed up and was ready, I dished up the food, and we had our first meal together. While we ate, I talked about myself, which made the children comfortable enough to talk about themselves. They shared their stories. I prayed with them and encouraged them with lessons from the Word of God. We spoke of our dreams and goals, and they were receptive to my counseling. This successful experience confirmed that Darlington and I would continue our efforts, and God continued to provide. His goodness is never ending. Each night we prayed with the boys, and they opened up to us. I always share a Bible story, and I tried to encourage them by telling them that of all of the children in Zimbabwe, they were special. I asked, did you ever stop to consider why you were living here and having these experiences? I pointed out that not just anyone could do what they were doing. I acknowledged how strong they were and that they were survivors, living on their own in the streets, while other kids had it easy being taken care of. I said I felt honored to know that because I believed I was sitting next to exceptional young men who had the potential to be presidents, CEOs of companies, pastors, teachers, doctors. I tried hard to convince them that they had it in them. I told them I believed there was a reason they had it so hard, and that was that God knew they were strong enough to handle the challenges that they were being bombarded with every day and night. And they had the strength and the power not simply to survive, but to conquer the challenges and succeed. I said these words to encourage them to have dreams and hope for the future. I assured them that God loves us all, and because He does, He is going to help us. They invited me into their community to the extent that if one of them did something bad, like stealing, fighting, taking drugs, or getting arrested, they would open up and honestly share the details with me. They trusted me. During this time I spent listening to them, I tried to figure out the root of each child's predicament and how their unique situation could be helped. These children had lost hope that anything in life that was good would come their way. Then I realized they'd maybe never had that hope in the first place. That broke my heart, and I wanted to help them find hope. They had no purpose or cause, and they felt lost. Most suffered from feelings of abandonment, and those feelings were legitimate, as practically every one of them had been abandoned. Each boy carried an undue amount of baggage, the weight of it causing him to sink into depths of despair. I spent 4 hours each night with the boys, and when it was time for me to go home, they would walk with me all the way to the bus stop to make sure that I stayed safe. Even if my bus was late, they would not leave me until I was safely on board and headed to my apartment. I always looked back, and there they'd be, standing with their arms raised high, waving goodbye to me. The streets was its own kind of neighborhood, with thieves and gangs, drug pushers, and more. But in Harare, most neighborhoods had their own unique and perilous characteristics. At night, my own neighborhood had more than its fair share of prostitutes looking for business. And after 9 o'clock, the police were all over the place, ready to haul any woman off to prison should she dare be out. So after leaving the children and riding home alone on the bus, itself a daring act, I would finally reach my street, and as I got off the bus, I'd pray, God, oh God, it was you who sent me to help the children. Now please help me and protect me so that I can arrive back home safely. Please don't let the police stop me. You know, he answered my prayer every single night. I always arrived safely, and I never met up with any police officers or others who could have done me harm. I was and am still thankful, so very thankful that God kept me safe, as I had heard the most terrible stories of things that happened to women in my neighborhood every night. I fell into a routine. I would wake, go to work, shop for food on my way home after work, cook dinner for the children, and then take it to them. The children were always waiting for me, and it was obvious that they looked forward to my visit each night. We developed a strong relationship based on trust, love, and concern for one another. So that's Darlington's story, just part of it. As Titanda said, her book is about different pieces. When I introduced her, I took excerpts from the book and created the introduction. That's not how it's written in her book. Darlington's story, again, is much more involved, but I took little pieces, snippets from it to create an overall general look at his life and how the two of them working in a companionship, partnership, started Titanda going out and doing what she had wanted to do. So she had been working with these children in the street with Darlington and other children. And so you might want to know, well, what comes next? Bear with me. This is the boy's story. In the time I had been helping the children, it became apparent to me that as long as they were on the streets, their lives were not going to change for the better. I knew I must help them get away from that environment. I asked Darlington to help me look for a place, an accommodation away from the downtown streets and the people they associated with there. He told me he found something only 3 doors down from where he was living in Zvarsakwe. Devarsakwa. There. It's a really long word and we've been practicing it. I still messed up. We call it DZ. This was an extraordinarily poor community with high density, and it was certainly not the ideal or what I had hoped to provide for the boys, but I reasoned that for now it was at least a roof over their heads and I would continue to look for something better. It was the winter of 2014 when I moved 4 boys off the streets and into their room. They were the occupants of one room in a 5-bedroom house where entire families were crammed into each of the other 8 by 10 bedrooms. Some families had as many as 5 people with them. In total, 24 individuals were living in this house, including my 4 boys. And they were all sharing a small outside bathroom with a single Blair toilet, that's a hole in the ground, and a shower. I had once again taken a leap of faith by moving the boys across town and into this place of shelter, for even as I moved them in, I knew I didn't have the money to pay even the first month's rent. But I turned to God for help, and 2 weeks later, He provided for us. I was so relieved and thankful as I did not want to tell the boys that they had to go back to the streets because I didn't have enough money to even pay for one small room. The boys were so grateful to be off the streets and away from the dangers inherent there, to have a place of their own and to be out of the rain and cold. They couldn't stop thanking me, but as much as they appreciated it, I knew this situation was not without major problems. Better than sleeping on the streets, they'd only advanced to sleeping on the floor. So the next day I arrived with provisions that I took from my own apartment to try to make them more comfortable. I brought them a bucket, some blankets, plates, and cooking pots. And then we realized the problem was there was no way to cook food. So I went to the next door room and talked to the lady living there. She said the boys could use her 2-burner stove for the time being. Another miracle. It was only a short while later when Pastor Fadzai reached out to me again asking if I needed any help. I told him we surely did, but the thing we needed most at this time was a small stove for the children. I told him how I moved the boys into the room, and I was trying to provide them with things that they needed. Next thing you know, he brought me an electric 2-burner stove and a small oven, and we were most thankful for it. A lady, a complete stranger, heard about the work I was doing with these children, and she came to me offering to pay for the boys' school expenses. She bought their school uniforms and paid for their books and all of their fees. The blessings just kept coming. Life had definitely changed for this group of boys. They now attended school and had a safe place to live, away from the perils of the street. I continued to try to make life in their room home more bearable as I provided more supplies with each of my visits. In the corner next to the stove, I placed a bucket for storing water, and so this corner became the kitchen. Cans and bags of food that I brought were stacked up here, and when we sat in that area to share meals, it became our dining room. The sparse 8x10 space served its purpose, alternating from a bedroom at night where the boys slept next to each other on the floor like sardines, to a kitchen, eating area, and place where homework was done. Most of their homework had to be done during daylight hours. The bulb in the ceiling was dim, and the only other light came from a window, one window in their room. Now this window had a curtain rod with curtains on it, and we took advantage of how it served multiple purposes. As a window, it provided light, and the curtain rod became a closet on which school uniforms and other clothes could be hung. The curtain itself was a blanket, right? And the off-the-floor storage was much appreciated because the boys said the floor was really full and there was barely room to sleep. 6 months went by and this small home served my 4 young men well. They were terribly crowded, but when someone Darlington knew gave us a single bed and we brought it to the boys, it was amazing how they adjusted, and suddenly there was plenty of room for that bed. Each of the 4 boys took their turn sleeping on the new bed, and though it took up a great deal of precious space, it was most definitely a welcome addition. As the boys adjusted to their new life, so too did their room. Though seemingly impossible at the time, strength with each necessity and comfort we added. First the stove, the bed, water and food, and now stacks and stacks of cardboard boxes filled with school books, clothes, shoes, and toiletries. Things had to be really organized so we could find anything. And we used the bed for seating, as well as a place to do homework and eat meals when someone wasn't sleeping there. Unfortunately, now I wasn't able to visit the boys each evening as I did when they were on the streets. I would go see them as often as I could, but they lived far, far away from where we first met and clear across the city from where my apartment was or where I worked. Of course, I was using public transportation, so as you know, it was not easy to get there. And more often than not, there were complications with buses, such as one pulling up might be full, and I'd have to wait for the next, which could be a long wait. Or one would be out of service. And even occasionally, a bus would be entirely removed from the route, of course, with no advance notice. What I had not anticipated was how the life the boys knew and lived on the streets, including the fighting and the abuse of others, it had not gone away simply because I took them off the street. Even though the surroundings changed for them, the behavior followed them into the house and even into their school. I realized I needed to spend a lot more time with them. And boy, I had my work cut out for me. Every night following work, I would make my cross-city journey, and I realized that since moving the boys into the room, my role had changed. I had become a provider of comforts now, and I wasn't staying as long to counsel them or pray with them, share from the Bible with them, because I was worried about the dangers I was going to encounter getting back home. What wasn't apparent at first was how my not being there that much anymore had allowed a sort of distance to settle in between us. I needed to get close to them again so we could regain our family status. Once again, I adjusted my schedule so that I had time to listen to their stories and find out about their struggles. I made sure I also had time to counsel and support them. Each time we were together, we spent time reading from the Bible. We held hands and prayed. By this time in the story, Tatenda had met Jerry and they'd begun working together. I gave the boys examples of how responsible people and people with good morals and ethics would behave when they were put to the test. Jerry helped me and we gave them situations that they responded to by telling us how they would handle themselves. We acted out scenarios in which they had to choose between making a good or bad choice. We learned that making the right choice was not a given because in their lives, all they had seen and experienced were people modeling bad behavior. They had no healthy role models. They had no heroes. Even though I had been teaching them that they needed to start living well and treating each other with respect and behaving at school and in the community, the truth was, for the most part, they simply did not know how to do that. In order to grab their attention and make them realize the severity of this, I told them, because if you don't, you're going to be reported to the police and you might end up going to prison. As they progressed, I took them to places to practice behaving and making good choices. One of my greatest challenges was Pembe. He was one of the oldest boys and he verbally and physically abused the other boys, took their food and threatened them with bodily harm, extreme bodily harm. He had lived in the streets for 12 years and the resulting damage was not easy to repair. He was only 6 when he left his father and stepmother in the rural areas. His stepmother abused him and constantly lied to his father, saying that his son had been disrespecting her. Pembe's father had a mental illness and he could not distinguish what was true and not. So one day he took an axe and swinging it at Pembe, the axe landed in Pembe's hand. Fearing for his life, Pembe ran away from home and hid out in the forest. He survived there on his own for 4 years. Eventually, he traveled to Harare and found the city center and all of the street children, and they became his friends and allies. He had been on his own 12 years, 8 of them in the streets, and was well seasoned by the time I met him. He showed clear evidence of years of abuse, and Pembe would carry the scars of his experiences at home with him for the rest of his life. This might be hard to understand, but please read the captions at the bottom.
Hello, my name is Vasily Primerensons. I am a Zimbabwean of origin, but currently based in the Cyprus studying Bachelor in International Relations. For this, I'm speaking about I was in Zimbabwe. I'm not just speaking the street, but I am today. We studied abroad. We studied chemistry for 1 or 4 years. This is that it was in 14 mid-October. She used to come I still remember the name of the school traveling room, and she used to come with food and give us food. You know, I do trust in her because she was doing a good thing, so I shared to call it all the Zimbabwe. You know, she didn't do that for me only, but we were 4 boys who she took off from the streets, and we thank God that it was a successful move. She didn't get to where I am right now. You have a good sister, but for me, I don't consider you a sister, and I consider you a mother, and my mother, I would thank you. Thank you very much. Children, I would everything I wanted to know about my life. Now I'm someone, you know, I still remember you told me that one day you were be speaking fluent English, and look what I'm doing now. I'm speaking fluent English. I still remember my English was in pieces because I was speaking in the streets. I didn't know how to speak English, you know. It was just shown on my native language, but thanks to you, Sister Tatiana.
Then there was Thomas. This young man had grown up watching his father engage in one battle after another with people from all walks of life. Thomas's father actually died right in front of him after fighting a man in their neighborhood. Then his mother died when he was 14 years old, and none of his relatives were willing to help him as they were struggling with their own children. Alone, afraid, and hungry, Thomas resorted to begging in the streets of Harare. Following in his father's footsteps, he fought for what he wanted and needed. He fought so many children in the street that he had quite a reputation and was welcomed into gangs that were known for fighting and violence. Thomas knew no other way and thought coming to blows was how he could solve differences and settle issues. On many occasions, I went with Thomas to apologize to parents of children that he had threatened to kill. Children who simply did something he didn't like. Once he put his hands around the neck of a child and strangled him. The child did not die, but whether at school or in the community, Thomas could not control his anger. There was something inside him that was just broken. It broke when he witnessed the fight in which his father was killed. How could I expect these children to just start behaving like responsible citizens? I had taken on a huge challenge, and I worried that I could not do this on my own. More and more now, I spent time talking and counseling the boys because the significance of my role as their teacher and how to live a good and happy life laid heavily on my shoulders. We had to start with basics. Thank God they should have learned as babies or toddlers. Trust, loyalty, honesty, empathy, and love. I assumed these were intuitive traits, that it was only their experiences on the streets that had caused the boys to do bad things. But working with them, I realized that these boys were without core values, and they were missing the traits that I assumed were inherent in all people. I had so much to learn, and we had so much to do. It was a process that took a lot of patience. I had to take into account what each of these people had been through, because unless I understood each one's background, I could not unravel the damage. I encouraged and I did not judge. I learned that some of the things some boys had told me over a long period of time, none of it was true. But over time, as I gained more and more of their trust, and I was consistent with it and fair with them, their truths came out. They eventually opened up to me and freely shared the real truths of their lives and what they'd experienced at home and in the streets. Once my eyes were open to these realities, the realities of savage lives of street children, the lives my boys were living, I realized we had problems beyond my imagination, and the drastic measures were what were required. I needed to spend even more time with them, and I must find a better way to support them. I was in way over my head and did not have the skills and the knowledge or resources to deal with drug addiction, thievery, illicit sex, and STDs, all rampant among my boys. I was reminded that I needed to rely on God. I don't know why I thought I had to do this on my own in the first place. I knew that God had sent me to do this work, and He knew what I was up against. So I prayed, asking for the wisdom and knowledge to change these souls and then guide them to lives where better choices could be made. As I was awakened to the dark side of life on the streets and how involved these children were in it, my mind turned to all the other children who were out there without help. They were there through no fault of their own. Their parents could not afford to care for them and their offspring, so they were literally kicked out into the streets to fend for themselves. And if they came back, they had better arrive with money or skills to make money, or they weren't welcome. You see, at first when a youngster finds himself on the street, he's fair pickings. Tenured and seasoned street children descend upon them quickly and violently. They are left beaten, and whatever possessions they might have brought are stolen from them immediately. They might slink off into a hiding place to sleep at night and mend their wounds, hoping to not be killed in their sleep. Then daytime provides a time to make friends and associations which are for protection. A gang is likely to take an immunity so that only if they can pass the test of initiation. And once they know how to navigate the street life, well, believe it or not, they become addicted to it. To those of us fortunate to never have known or imagined such a life, it's difficult to understand how a child could survive and even prosper in the context of such a culture. I became aware that some had escaped horrors of abuse so terrible that even what they suffered on the street paled in comparison. Each night became a party of drugs and sex. What I was offering and teaching them hardly competed with what they were experiencing on the street. However, I refused to give up, and I knew God would help me. The boys' needs were immense, and the attention and support I was giving them used me up completely. I had nothing left for all the other children in the street, and there were so many. This weighed heavily on my mind. After a long and exhausting day at work, followed by hours of caring for the boys, one night I arrived home, and there was a whole other group of boys lying on the street in front of my apartment. They were some of the boys that I had connected with, but basically abandoned when my attention became consumed by the needs of the boys I was taking care of in the house. Each of these children lying there on the street was barefoot, wore dirty clothes, and did not even have so much as a jacket, and it was the dead of winter. This group was so relieved to see me because they had spent days trying to track me down. I was amazed at their story, and my heart sank. I wished I had more resources to help them. They each shared with me, and one of the things that got them through their days was knowing that I would be there at night for them on the street. But then I had quit coming. I had abandoned them. I had left them to spend more time with the boys that I had in the room of the house. And I tried to explain that to them, but the more I explained, the worse it got. Finally, I stopped trying to justify what I couldn't, and I let the boys take over the conversation. They pleaded with me to come see them, and they shared challenges that they were facing. They told me how much they needed me. And at first, I said I would come. And then they decided instead, because that really wasn't possible, that I would have them join me here at my apartment every night. I told them that even though it was going to be late, that if they came, I would arrive and we would go inside where it was warm and I would give them a meal. Then they asked me if they could spend the night. Spend the night? I had no room for everyone. There were a lot of them. But I felt these children, even crammed in my apartment without beds or bedding, things would be better for them inside than on the street. I agreed they could stay the night. The first thing I did each morning in June of 2015 when I woke up was pray. God, teach me your love. Teach me to show your love to these boys. Show me the challenges each child is facing. There are now many of them. Help me to treat them equally and to be consistent. God help me to have time so I don't neglect even one. Most of them have faced rejection from their families, and they must not feel rejected by me. God, I'm here to do your work. I've been asked by people if I wasn't afraid when I went by myself in potentially life-threatening situations, down dark alleys, into the rooms where the 4 boys lived or my home where they stayed at night. They couldn't possibly understand how I could actually go to sleep with that going on around me. Perhaps it was careless of me, but I did not worry or feel concerned for my safety. I felt at peace, and I was sure God would keep me safe. I felt God's peace. God was watching over me and knew why I was doing these things. I believe the children knew it too. And I could sense my trust, and they could sense my trust in them. We were a team, and we moved on. All of it went over time. You guys just were really, really polite and good listeners. Thank you so much. Like I said, I think it's powerful.
So next Sunday, we're gonna do conversations and gratitude. We're gonna talk about gratitude. You know, it's Thanksgiving time. Think about a lot of the things that you're grateful for. And it will be an opportunity for us to share with each other some of our own personal experiences. So I hope you'll come, because I think it'll be a really interesting way of learning about other people who come every week to this session. So I invite you to come.